This week, Putin made a statement that deviated from his usual rhetoric. He addressed Russia directly and gave a warning, saying we will have to start worrying and we will have to start dealing with the economy. And what that means is one thing: brace yourselves for impact. And this is different from anything he has ever said before and shows that Russia is in a seriously bad position.
The person you just heard is Kaolin Robertson, an Icelandic journalist who works in Ukraine, closely following the war and the geopolitical situation in the region. And you know what? He is absolutely right. In his video, he points out something disturbing that is happening in Russia right now. He cites a post made by Anton Geraschenko, a Ukrainian politician close to the public security sector. In a post made on the social network Blue Sky, Geraschenko wrote something alarming. He said that Putin, for the first time, personally acknowledged the problems in the economy. And along with his statement, he posted a video of Putin himself.
Now, about the expenses themselves. 63%, is that a lot or a little? 63% of Russia's gross domestic product allocated to defense needs represents 13.5 trillion rubles. And our entire gross domestic product then is 223 trillion rubles. Now, 13.5 trillion out of 223, is that a lot or a little? It's not a little, it's not a little. We funded this through inflation, which we are now battling. Yes, we are deliberately moving towards a certain soft landing of the economy in some aspects.
Stop and think about what Putin just said. He made it clear that Russia's defense spending is 13.5 trillion rubles, and that's approximately $170 billion. That's a lot. And he went on to try to ease things by saying, we pay for this with inflation, but now we're fighting against that inflation. Did you realize how serious this is? For the first time in history, Putin publicly admitted that military spending is enormous, that it caused inflation, and that now they need to fight the inflation they themselves created. For those who know the Kremlin, the Russian government, when it gets to this point, it's because things are really getting complicated. But here's the part that's going to shock you. While Putin admits this crisis, the official Russian gross domestic product numbers show the opposite. A growth of approximately 4% in 2024. After all, how is this possible? Well, the answer will leave you speechless. Russia is actually not growing. It's cannibalizing itself. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how this is happening. Let's start with the facts. Facts that Putin can no longer hide. Starting with inflation. Officially, Russia reports 9.5% inflation at the end of 2024. The central bank had initially forecast inflation at a maximum of 8.5% for the year. But the head of its monetary policy department now expects inflation to close between 9.6% and 9.8%. Seems under control, doesn't it? But here's the problem. Research shows that the real inflation perceived by Russians is between 16% and 22%. That's right, almost double what the government admits. Can you see any similarity with your country? And take a look at these specific numbers on price increases. Potatoes went up by 81%. Cabbages 37%, butter 36.5%. And that's exactly why videos are appearing on TikTok of stores in Moscow. Selling bread cut in half. It's not creativity. They are having to adapt to the new scenario. And to fight this inflation that's getting out of control, the Russian central bank raised the interest rate to 21%. 21%. Just so you have an idea, that's a very high rate, and it discourages any investment in the civil sector. It's like pulling the economy's handbrake with full force. And if you doubt that it doesn't have that much impact, consider this. Putin himself has already publicly asked the central bank to find other solutions.
The central bank could, more effectively and earlier, start using certain instruments unrelated to raising the key rate.
When an authoritarian figure like Putin publicly questions the decisions of his own country's central bank, it's because the situation is already completely out of control. And we're not just talking about abstract numbers. The Russian government itself is admitting the obvious. The Minister of Economy, Maxim Reshetnikov, said that the country is on the verge of a recession. The president of Sberbank, the largest bank in Russia, warned that the country is heading for a perfect storm. And here is the most impressive fact. Sberbank has not lent a single ruble to new civilian businesses in 2024. Zero. All resources were directed to support the war industry. Now stop and think. When the Russians themselves admit this publicly, it's because the private situation is already catastrophic. But I know that many of you must be wondering, if the situation is really that bad, how do you explain the 4% gross domestic product growth that was reported some time ago? And the answer, well, it's in what many call a cannibal economy. And I'll explain the reason for this term. Imagine a country split in half. On one side, the military sector is running at full steam. Factories are working 24 hours a day. Wages are increasing by 30 to 60% to attract workers. Meanwhile, the civilian sector is suffering from a lack of credit and investment, systematically deprived of resources. Just to give you an idea, Russian military spending reached 8.7% of gross domestic product in 2024. This is a level never seen since the end of the Soviet Union. It represents approximately 1/3 of the entire national budget, surpassing social spending for the first time in modern Russian history. Now, this distorted economy is creating an even bigger problem. The war is costing $200 billion a year for a country with an economy smaller than Italy's. And what's worse, these costs are completely getting out of control because Russia is losing extremely expensive military equipment that it can't replace. Look at what's happening on the battlefield. Russia is suffering losses of military equipment at an alarming rate. And this is especially true for high-tech systems like air defense batteries. 400. Each of these batteries costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And did you guys see the videos that came out last week? S-400 systems being systematically destroyed by Ukrainian missiles and drones in Crimea. They turned into smoldering scrap in a matter of minutes. And things could still get worse for the Russians. Due to sanctions and a compromised industrial base, these advanced systems are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to replace quickly. The factories that produced them depended on Western components that no longer arrive. The Russian strategy to deal with these losses has been to dive into Soviet-era arsenals. Thousands of older tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery pieces are being taken out of storage, hastily refurbished and sent to the front lines. This approach allows them to maintain the quantity of equipment on the ground, but with a significant degradation in quality. While Ukraine is receiving modern systems like REMARS, Patriots and F-16s, Russia is increasingly dependent on equipment that is decades old. It's like a fight between a modern smartphone and a phone from the 80s. But there's something even more worrying for Russia. These Soviet stockpiles won't last forever. Western military analysts predict that Russia's reserves of key Soviet-era equipment will be largely depleted by mid or late 2025. From that point on, Russia's ability to replace losses will depend entirely on current industrial production, which is slow and limited by sanctions. The problem is not only material, but also human.
Attention group, crossing the intersection ahead.
Since the beginning of the invasion, more than 1,700,000 young people have fled Russia. It's an irreversible brain drain. Engineers, programmers, specialized technicians. Precisely the people who could keep the defense industry running. Those who stayed were either mobilized into the army or work exclusively for the war machine. The result is catastrophic. We're talking about a brutal shortage of skilled labor in sectors like construction, transportation, and technology. And there's another fascinating aspect to this story. Putin wanted to free Russia from dependence on the West. The result was exactly the opposite. He increased his country's reliance on China. Look, trade between Russia and China exploded to $245 billion in 2024. And with that, China became an absolutely indispensable economic partner for Russia. But make no mistake, this is not an alliance that benefits both sides equally. The Russian economy is now just a fraction of the Chinese economy, and the dependence is almost total. Did you know that microchips,
American ones, are used in Russian missiles? This Ukrainian army research team has uncovered evidence that Russian weaponry commonly includes foreign electronics, microchips, cameras, antennas, and processors. But they get there through China.
And now, Russia is totally dependent on the Chinese for technology and essential components. By trying to break free from the West, Putin has condemned his country to an even greater and more dangerous dependence. As you can see, Russia's ability to sustain its military industry is no longer in its own hands. It's in the hands of the Chinese. If China decides to cut off this support due to international pressure or its own interests, the Russian war machine stops immediately. And do you want to know the most ironic thing about all this? The sanctions that were supposed to weaken Russia ended up creating an even greater dependence. Now, Russia needs intermediary countries to get everything it needs. Want an example? German car exports to Kyrgyzstan have increased by 5,100% since the start of the war. Guess where those cars go next? Straight to Russia. This system of circumventing sanctions forces Russia to rely on more expensive, inefficient supply chains that are completely out of its control. Putin ended up trading his short-term independence for permanent vassalage. Now, perhaps the most important part. Let's get to the math that makes all of this unsustainable. The war is currently costing something around $200 billion a year. The Russian economy is at $2 trillion. Russian soldiers earn $2,500 a month, which is 10 times the average salary in the poorest regions where most of them come from. They literally fight just for money. So if the money dries up, the motivation disappears. Considering this absurdly high interest rate, frozen civilian credit, and real inflation of 20%, the ability to keep paying these salaries is reaching its limit. On the battlefield, each S-400 or S-500 system destroyed represents hundreds of millions of dollars that cannot be recovered. Russia is, in other words, in a race against time, trying to achieve its objectives before its material and human resources are completely exhausted. The dominoes are already falling. It's just that in slow motion. With each passing month, The civilian economy gets weaker, dependence on China increases, military stockpiles decrease, and human capital deteriorates. And Putin? Well, he can no longer hide this reality. The question is not if Russia will collapse, but when the Russians themselves will realize that their leadership has condemned them to a generation of poverty and external dependence. And judging by the signs this week, with Putin publicly admitting the economic problems, they are already starting to realize it. And you, what do you think? Based on everything we've seen today, how long do you think Russia can sustain this situation before the reality becomes impossible to hide? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this video helped you better understand what's really happening in Russia, please share it with others. Quality information needs to circulate. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe so you don't miss the next content. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.